Hi, this is John, Janus Service department here, and we're going to be installing a lead acid battery upgrade on a Phoenix today. The steps are pretty much same, whichever model you're working on, except the Phoenix has the extra step. We'll have to drill some holes in the frame for mounting the new box because on the lithium it mounts on a little different than it does on the halcyon, and they mount the same. The lead acid mounts the same. So you can ignore that if you've got the halcyon, but I'll mention that when we get to it. We're going to start by removing the lithium battery here. Need a 10. I've laid out most of the tools, hopefully, what I'll need to be using here. There's some 17 millimeter socket and open end, 10 millimeter, a couple 13s millimeters, and I have an assortment of sockets here, just a 1/4 inch drive for some 10 millimeter and some 8 millimeter things that we'll be using to take off. So I'll start here, remove the negative terminal first, so 10 millimeter wrench. Got that off. And then the positive. Okay. Get those disconnected and we shouldn't have any sparks flying. And then we will remove, just go ahead and remove the box here. On the Phoenix, it's the two bolts on the back. On the halcyon, I believe that mounts on the side there. We got a speed wrench here. Can't get a very big movement on the wrench, so you have one of these that speeds that up a little bit. And the box will start flopping around when you get this second one loosened up. There. Got that one. And these wires will feed out the bottom. Just pull those on out. And you can set that aside. We will be reusing the positive lead. The negative, if you've still got the lithium ion battery, you probably still have the original wiring as well, which we are going to upgrade as part of this. We used to have one ground wire that ran from the engine to the battery. With the upgrade, we send 2 ground wires. There's a short one and a long one. We'll be looking at those when we go to install those. The short one will run from the engine, the same place that this current ground battery runs. It'll run from that down to the frame, the engine mount on the frame there. And then the negative lead from the battery will also run down there. So both things are grounded to the frame instead of just grounding the battery to the engine. So I will start, next step will be to remove this ground wire that runs from the engine. To do that, we have to go to the other side, and we'll need an 8 millimeter socket wrench. So now we're on the left side of the engine. Take off the cover here, which exposes the front sprocket and also lets us get to the bolt that the ground wire is attached to. And these bolts you want to make sure you set aside. You will want to reuse those. 2 bolts hold this cover on. And then there is 1 bolt back in down there that is holding the ground wire. Okay. There are two things attached to this bolt. There is the ground wire and also a little strap that holds a vent tube on most of the bikes. You can see running through here. So actually we can leave that bolt there, leave that vent tube strap, pull out the ground wire, and that we will not be reusing. We can set that aside. I'm going to get the two ground wires from the kit that we sent you. These are the two ground wires. The short one runs from the crankcase, that bolt we just took the other one off of, and this one will attach to the frame at the engine mount. And on the longer one, this one, the larger terminal end mounts to the frame, and the smaller one will run up to the battery and attach to the battery. So what we're using here is the short one. We will run this bolt through it. And then feed this back into the crankcase. And tighten that down. Since that will be running down, I'm going to feed it down there, so when I tighten it, it's going the right direction. And run the ground wire just to make sure there's enough length to get it down to the engine. I'm going to make sure that it comes out below this little hose clamp there. And obviously, I mean, it's a small bolt. I'm using a 1/4 inch socket, so we're not putting a whole lot of force on tightening that down. There. That looks better. We should be done here. I'm going to leave the cover off since I got it off just in case we need to come back and address everything, but hopefully we're done there. Now this is probably the most tedious part, just because it's inconvenient to get to, but where the rear engine mount on the right side attaches to the frame, we're going to take that bolt all the way out. We're replacing it with a longer bolt so we can attach the ground wires to the other side of that. And because of the position behind the frame here, you can't get to a socket with a socket, so I'm using a ratcheting open end wrench to get it. But you still can't get a whole lot of movement. So it takes a little time to get it off of there. Okay, now we can do this last little bit here by hand. It finally got loose enough. And there we go. Pull that out. Now, I'm going to get the replacement bolt we're putting in there. You see it's just, I think this is a 25 millimeter and replacing it with a 30, so just a little bit longer, but it gives us enough sticking out on the other side that we can mount the wires to there, and then we'll fasten those down with the nylock nut. So, just reverse the process we just went through. Put the flat washer that we sent, put that on the bolt. And put it back in and tighten it down. Okay, got it started. Yeah, we're finally getting there. There. Okay, got that snugged up. And the next step will be putting the other ground wire, fastening that on, and putting the nut on to hold those to the frame. Okay, got the ground wire from the engine on there. Now I'm bringing the other one, it'll run up to the battery. Put that on the bolt, and then the nylock. And just snug that down. Not very much movement on this side either, but it not going as far as this won't take quite so long. And this isn't holding, just snugging the wires down so it doesn't need to be terribly tight. That looks good. So now we've got the engine grounded and we have the other ground wire coming up to the battery ready there. So now we're ready to mount to, the next step will be the battery box. And for this one, because this is the Phoenix, we need to drill some holes in the frame. And I made a little template. And if you're doing this is your customer doing this yourself, we'll also send a template out. I just made this from an existing frame. Use a center punch here to mark where to drill the holes. There, we've got those marked. Now I'll get the drill. I'm going to start with an 1/8 inch bit to drill a pilot hole. Makes it a little easier. The final hole we'll be using a 1/4 inch bit on. Okay, then we'll switch to the 1/4 inch drill bit. The new battery box mounts there, as well as to the engine mount there at the rear of the engine. So we'll have to take that bolt out. 17 millimeter. We will be reinstalling this bolt. So I'll set the nut and the washer aside. Now we'll grab the battery box and come back to the other side. So on this side we've got the battery box and the two 6 millimeter bolts with the lock washers. It mounts behind. We'll attach these 6mm nuts and bolts in before we put in the engine mount. It gives us a little more flexibility to move that and get them started. And got plenty of room to mount that in there. Okay. I'm going to tighten down these. Doesn't take a whole lot of force on those. You don't want to twist them off. They're small, they would twist off easily. Okay, those are tightened down. And now we'll get the engine mount tightened up again. So we get the nut and the washer back on this side with a 17mm on the back side here. And this is also a reason for leaving the cover off. I think you need it off to put this to get to this bolt. So the majority of the work is done now. Now it's putting the battery in. So I've got the battery rubber, and the grommets. The rubber just fits into the battery box. Be able to fit it in there pretty nicely. These grommets fit over the wires where they come through the battery box there to keep them from rubbing on the metal. So we've got the ground wire that we just ran up from the frame. And the grommets will stretch enough to fit over the terminals. There's the negative, which will be in the back, and the positive, which will run to the front. And then we can feed them down into the holes, slots in the battery box. You want the groove of that grommet to just fit right in there. There we go. So now we're ready for the battery to sit in there. There is a little bit of assembly work to do on the battery. There's a connector piece that we mount to the top. There's a little bag in the bottom of the box. That comes with a connector extensions and 4 screws that use this hex wrench to fasten them down. These are a little bit different. We like positioning them on there so that they're away from the metal of the battery box as much as possible. So I'll put this one on the negative over here. Tighten it down. Do the same thing for the positive terminal. Tighten that down. Now we're ready to push this into the box. Make sure the rubbers are out to the outside. There's room for the battery to fit in. Install the positive terminal first, using the other screw. And finally the negative. And the final step will be the new battery cover. Strap goes down around the back. Make sure you don't pinch any wires behind that. There's a little slot in the bottom of the battery box. You can see it right there. It needs to, the strap needs to fit through there. So when you've got that fed through, you can grab it from this side and snap it on. Now sometimes you have to, you may have to stretch that, sometimes a little bit tight, getting that around. That one fit pretty good. Snap it on. And make sure lights work. Yep, we've got a battery. And now we're ready to put the cover back on the left side here. The bolts that came out. I'll spin them in finger tight. And then snug them up. It doesn't take a whole lot of force on these. Okay, that puts that on. And I think that wraps it up. Good luck in your endeavors.